Hi everybody. I've been asked a few times to do an instructional video about the leather weaving that you'll often see on the front of some medieval and early modern crossbows, particularly in Central Europe. And essentially this was a sort of decorative and functional binding method that helped hold the whole front end of the crossbow assembly together. So that's essentially where the prod and the stirrup are held together by binding. When you first assemble a crossbow, you initially bind these things together with hemp cord that's been waxed with beeswax, but then that was typically finished off with this leather strapping, leather lacing that's woven in a sort of very pleasing pattern across the front, which looks really nice, but functionally as well, by doing that weave, it actually increases the tension on everything as you're weaving it together, making it a very, very secure binding of those elements together. So let's get into it. So to get started, you basically just need two things. You need some leather cording. So I find this sort of roughly a quarter inch leather works pretty well. And then also a thin loop of wire. This is essential. You can't really do it without that, or at least I can't. And that's it. Well, of course, the other thing you need is a half-finished medieval crossbow. This one I've just roughed in the hemp binding for now, just for the purposes of this video. Anyway, let's get started. So to get started, you're gonna take your leather lace and go crosswise across. So you're going across all of that hemp binding, and then for the loose end, you can just sort of leave that loose for now. And at this point, you're not using the binding hole in the crossbow at all. You're just going around the prod, and this is really holding together the prod and the stirrup. So you're going to come around and go, and then go across again, pulling everything through. Especially initially, it's a bit of a pain because you've got such a long length of thread. But eventually, you don't have to deal with that as much as it gets shorter. So you go through again. Once you get around that first loop, you don't have to hang on to it anymore because it'll stay secure. So pulling everything through, and then through and around again. And this is where things start to get interesting. So because you want this to be in a nice woven pattern, you need to start going over and under. So here, instead of going straight across these two threads that these two laces that we've already laid in, instead of going straight across, we're going to go over the first one, since the lace next to it goes under. So next to it, we're going over, and then we need to get under this one, but it's already fairly tight, and that's where this little bit of wire loop comes into play. So the first thing you want to do is get your loose end of your lace. So make sure you have that available. I like to put a little bend in my wire loop. You're going to stick that under the lace that you want to go under, of course. Oops. Sometimes it helps to put a wooden handle on your loop of wire because it just makes it a lot easier to manipulate. So now we've got that. We're going to put our loose end through that loop, kind of like a needle and thread, and just pull that through. So you can see it sort of pulled that thread out of the way. That's because it's fairly loose there, and this is actually the loose end. So it is a bit fiddly. And then just pull the whole thing through. Oops. It is a bit fiddly, especially when you've got such a long length of stuff you're dealing with. Now, you'll notice that this lace here is twisted. So it's really important for this to look good that it's not twisted. So you need to sort of flatten it out a bit. And as we continue on this, I'll show you how to do that when the tension has increased. So now you can see that we've got a nice little pattern starting to emerge. So we do the same thing, come around and then back over. And we're going over the top because you can see the one next to it goes under, right? So now we're going over this one, but now we need to get under this one again. So we take our trusty bit of wire, our wire loop, dig it in. There we have it. And so now we need to get our free end. As we pull through 2 meters of leather cord. Get that through, and then pull it through. So once again, we're well twisted up here, which you don't want. So once you finish pulling it through, you can kind of start to untwist it just by hand. Just by going sort of back and forth and forcing those twists out. Again, very fiddly work, but there's really no help for that. And once that's through, you can pull it nice and tight. You don't have to pull super, super tight. It depends on the strength of your leather, too. This is not the strongest leather in the world. So you don't want to pull it too tight because it actually might break. But just tight enough. And come through again. Now, one of the things you'll notice is you can either go below when you're coming through for your next course. You can either go below or above. It doesn't really matter. The thing you want to keep an eye out for is that as you're looping, that it kind of is even. And as it grows, that it grows evenly all around. So we're going to continue with that process. So here we're going underneath. We need to go underneath since the one next to it is over. So again, our trusty metal loop. Dig that under wherever you can. And when the tension starts going up, it'll just hold itself in place. Keeping the tension on as best you can. You grab your free end. Oops. Into the loop, like that. Yank it through, and pull all of that loose length through. And again, as you're getting down towards the end, you want to make sure there's no twist. Hey, we lucked out. In this case, there was no twist to begin with, so we're good. Now we need to go under a third, and this is going, under again. So again, metal loop. Dig it underneath. Whoops. The good thing about this wire is you can bend it however is going to work best for you. Get it under there. Voila. Get your loop. Now be very careful when you're doing this. Notice I didn't reach around and through there because we would have been around the other side of the stirrup, which we don't want. At this point anyway. Get that through, pull it, and then continue. Oops. That's not helpful. And again, making sure there's no twist. So we do have a bit of twist. So notice I'm flattening it out here to make sure it's exactly how we want, and then pulling through, and that's pretty much gotten the twist out. So there, we're good to go. Notice this is moving. In the real scenario, when I've actually done the proper hemp binding, this would be already rock solid, so you wouldn't really have to worry about the movement too much. So we're going down and around. And now, before I decide which side I'm going to go do the next pass on, I'm just taking a look and seeing, well, is this closer to the bottom or is this closer to the top? And I can see this side's a little closer to the bottom, so I think we should go on the top this time. So that's what we're going to do. Again, keeping the same face of the leather out each time. And once again, we're going to go under. So I'm just going to carry on with this process. So one thing, instead of pulling it all the way through, I'm actually going to go, because we need to go under, if you can see, we need to go under this one as well. So instead of pulling the whole thing through and then weaving it again, I'm leaving this short end without pulling it through, digging in with our metal loop, feeding it in again, and pulling that through. Oops. Now we can pull the whole thing through in one go. It makes it a little easier. Now you'll notice we've got the wrong side of leather facing up, so we're going to fix that in a second, and I'll show you how. So I'm tracking that correct face of the leather through and around, and there we can see where the twist is. So what you want to do is hold it really close and let that twist pull through like that. Now the twist is gone. We've got the correct side facing up. So you can see the weave is now forming quite nicely. Now sometimes you'll find that these laces are dug down pretty well, so you won't be able to get your wire loop under it. So it's sometimes good to have an awl as well. So I probably should have mentioned at the beginning, an awl is a very handy tool. So you can kind of poke it in very gently, carefully not to tear it, and lift it up a little bit, and that helps you get your loop under. Oops. Always make sure when you're using the wire loop is that you're pushing the wire loop through the correct side, which is the opposite direction of where your lace is going to end up going. So we're going under, and we want to go under this one as well. Now at a certain point, you're going to start getting close to the edges of your stirrup. So there's really no rule as to sort of how close you can get before you have to start going behind it. I like to get pretty close so you can see the threads like sort of deforming around it, and that means it's really grabbing it. So I think we're going to do, so we've got on this side, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and on this side we've got 4. So we're going to do this 5th course here over the top of the stirrup arms here. And then after that, we're going to start going around the back side of the stirrup. Pull it through. Then it has to go under this next one, which is really buried in there. And by pulling it out here, this is where things really get structured nicely, because this is really what creates the tension and the structure of this weave. So it's okay if you have on either side, in fact, it's inevitable, you're going to have some overlap on these parts here. And that's totally okay, because the weave itself is forcing everything into that pattern. So there's really no way around that. So now we're coming around, and we're actually going to start going behind the stirrup. Another thing I want to point out is I'm doing this before the prod is strung. That's pretty important. It's going to be a lot harder to do this if the prod is already braced and strung. Now that we're starting to go behind the stirrup, we can, instead of going behind the prod now, we're going to finish off this by going in circles around the prod. Maybe 2-3 times or so. So the same principle applies as to doing opposite over and under, depending on the next one you've gone to. You're just simply omitting going behind the prod. So in this case, we're now going to pivot, and we're going to go across this course of threads right here. So this first one, because the one next to it is over, we're going to go under, over, under, over, under. So let's do that. There. Now we can pull the whole thing through. Again, just take it slow and be patient. I think we're twist free on this one, which is good. Yeah. So now we're going around the back of the stirrup. We're going to continue this around in that kind of way. So you can see how it's going to form this weave all the way around. So just keep that over-under pattern going. There, so we've gone once around. So you can do that again and again until it's really filled up and packed. And at the very end, that first loose end that you had, you can simply tie it in a knot behind where it's nice and hidden. And you can actually even tuck that behind the hemp bindings once that's complete. So there we have it. That is the process of doing the leather weaving at the front of a medieval crossbow. As you can see, it's not rocket science. It's just quite fiddly, and it just takes time. So just be patient with it. Make sure and keep track of the correct face of that leather lace as you're going through the weave and as you're going around towards the end. Correct for those twists as you go, because if you get a twist in there and you forget it and you've gone, 5 or 6 courses, you don't want to have to undo all that weaving. Trust me, I've done it. Don't do it. So keep track of those twists and correct for them as you go. Other than that, that's pretty much the whole process. Like I said, there's no wrong way of doing it, as long as the weave is nice and flat without the twists in it and nice and tight. Then you're pretty much good to go. So I hope this has been helpful, and we'll see you on the next video, which hopefully will come soon, and I'll be finishing, in fact, this crossbow that we were working on today, finishing up the inlay work and so on. So hopefully we'll see you in the next one very soon. Bye-bye.